But first up this evening, President Obama blaming Republicans and Rush Limbaugh, of all people, for the budget impasse in Congress. Now, look, Boehner said he has a plan to avert a government shutdown by passing the continuing resolution and maintaining the budget-cutting sequester. That's Boehner. He's got the story right. And by the way, there's a powerful new conservative movement to delay Obamacare taxes and mandates. And the GOP, frankly, is in the driver's seat. Obama is in trouble on this issue, and he knows it. That's why he's messing around and blaming Rush Limbaugh. It's just a dumb diversion. Let's bring in my pal, Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform. Our Free Market Friday panel still here. Ahmed Shihab Eldin, Avik Roy, and Mark Simone. Grover, welcome. Good evening. Great to have you back. I mean, from what I gather, Grover, Boehner's conference call made it very clear. First of all, no government shutdown. They're going to have a continuing resolution maybe till year end or thereabouts. But the interesting thing is, Grover, delaying Obamacare, not defunding Obamacare. I find that very interesting. What's your take on it?
Well, I think it's the correct strategy. The Boehner is quite correct. First, protect the sequester numbers. Don't let spending jump back up again. Don't punch a hole in those budget caps that were won in 2011. Second, what do we do about the train wreck, which the Democrats now agree, the train wreck of Obamacare? Obama's giving delays to big businesses, delays to campaign contributors, delays to the labor unions, delays to some of the insurance companies. What we say is, why not delay the individual mandate for people, for the American people, for small businesses? Because the president started to backpedal because of the failure of his own bill, I think it's very reasonable for people to say, let's delay much, all, most of Obamacare for 1 year. Get your act together. We'll look at it again.
All right, Ahmed, your take on this.
Well, I think, at the end of the day, Boehner maybe seems to be drinking more Merlot than he usually does. He seems like he has a measured response.
Merlot. As in California wine.
Yeah, I think that's what he likes. I mean, at least that's what I hear. Maybe more of it or less of it. But honestly, Larry, I think that this is an ill-advised step. I think that the suspension makes more sense. I mean, I get it, the short-term solution in terms of not completely going ahead of it. But, I mean, the 80 votes in the Republican caucus that we saw, or 80 members signing that letter.
80 Republican members signed the letter in round numbers. The letter basically, this is the defund crowd and risk a shutdown. But here's the thing. 153 or so wouldn't sign the letter. And that tells me, A, Boehner has the votes in his own caucus to win this, and of course, B, he'll carry the House. In fact, Avik, you were involved in this delay strategy that Grover described earlier. Do you all have the votes to stop the defunders? The defunders, I'm not against defunding it. I just don't want to shut the government down, and I don't want to have a debt ceiling impasse because I think that hurts the country and the GOP.
Well, let me make a couple of points. So first, there's two reasons why to go with a delay strategy versus a defund strategy, and they are, it's from a policy standpoint the right solution, and it's from a public sentiment standpoint the right solution. So the fact is the exchanges are not ready. Kevin Cunahan in Connecticut, who runs the Connecticut exchange, not a Republican, a Democrat, says, I wish we had another year. There are so many problems because there have been so many delays with the regulations and the computer systems, the privacy safeguards.
Securities, verification.
If you want the exchanges to work, you should want a delay, because a one-year delay would allow the exchanges to roll out more smoothly than they would otherwise. And that's where the public is, too. The public doesn't want there to be fraud. The public wants there to be privacy safeguards. They don't want to shut down the government. And so that's why it's a much more attractive strategy than shutting down the government.
Let me just come back to you, though. There is one open point here, okay? I think Boehner has the whip hand. I think they're playing their cards right. But, Grover, there is still some talk about defunding Obamacare, defunding, not even delaying, maybe delay, but there's still some loose talk about the debt ceiling. And Grover, I got to tell you, on fiddling with the debt ceiling, you lose me, buddy. You lose me, you lose Wall Street, you lose the international markets, you lose everybody. It's like committing political hara-kiri.
Well, what's interesting is that when people talk about defunding, I'm in favor of defunding Obamacare. I'm just not in favor of having that be the only thing on the table and closing the government down if you don't get that today. There's a letter written by a dozen senators. Ted Cruz is sort of the point man for that. And they said, you shouldn't, we promise never to vote for any budget bill, continuing resolution, appropriation, unless it has a complete defunding now of Obamacare.
But that's it.
That's different than saying...
But Grover, much as I really respect Senator Ted Cruz, and I agree with him on most issues, not particularly, but I agree with him on defunding in a theoretical sense. But that's an easy vote, Grover. That's an easy vote. In other words, voting nay on a budget bill in the Senate is an easy vote for Republicans. Real easy.
But senators are not allowed to instruct House members on, you should do our strategy, why don't you go do that? That's not having a lot of resonance. As much as there's enthusiasm for ending and reducing and delaying Obamacare as much as possible, people don't appreciate being told what tactics and strategy they should take by somebody else.
Committee. All right, I got real fast.
I just really quickly wanted to say that, we can talk about theoretical arguments, but there are divisions within the Republican Party, and I think when we talk about defunding, even if the conversation is theoretical, it's a waste of a conversation to have. It's not going to happen. I disagree that the president would ever sign that. This is his prized possession. I mean, Larry, you know this. He's not going to agree with that.
I actually disagree with Mark. I think he'll never give up on it. But Avik, I'll say this. The one thing I like about the defunders is the idea of just getting rid of Obamacare altogether. Keep that hope alive. I do admire that. I don't think strategically, no, let me change that. I don't think tactically it's the right thing to do, but I think strategically and theoretically it is the right thing to do. In that sense, I think Rubio and Cruz and them are right.
Well, I think most conservatives, if not all conservatives, support repealing Obamacare in theory. But the thing is, with the president in office, with the Senate controlled by Democrats, that's not. So, here's the difference between the House letter and the Senate letter. So the House letter that you were talking about that was signed by the 80 Republicans, it doesn't do what Grover was talking about in the Senate. It doesn't actually say that if you support anything other than defunding, you're a bad guy. It says this is one of the things we want to push for, but we'll also support alternatives.
All right, we're all going to come back. You guys, you signed the letter, right? The Heather Higgins letter.
I did.
And Grover, you were in the Heather Higgins letter, or maybe you wrote the letter. All right, that's the delay strategy, which is picking up a lot of good support. Things have changed the last couple weeks. So remember all those warnings we heard about the budget cutting sequester? All the jobs that would cut. But what's really happening out there is that Obamacare is forcing cities and states and counties to either slash government jobs or cut back on their hours worked. A Washington Post blog entry details how hours have been cut sharply to avoid Obamacare costs by cities and counties from Wisconsin to Texas to Virginia to right here in New Jersey. So could it be that Obamacare is the real job killer? We continue now with our free market panel. Ahmed Shihad Eldin of HuffPost Live, Avik Roy of the Manhattan Institute, Mark Simone of WR Talk Radio. Okay, do you disagree with me, Ahmed? Do you disagree with this whole thing? This came from a Washington Post guy, blogger, so you know it's a liberal point of view.
So my question is, why do you need to actually do this? Why do you need to create more jobs at lower hourly rates? I don't understand that, and I haven't really seen the evidence that suggests that people feel pressured to do this. I remember seeing Forever 21 do this. I understand they want to keep their manufacturing costs low, but this is going to harm their reputation.
This is government.
I understand, but isn't it going to harm their employees? Isn't this going to essentially...
They're going to cut their employees. I mean, there's the thing. Let me go to Avik. They're going to do both. You read carefully this thing. Reed Wilson, okay? It's pretty good from Washington. Two things. They're cutting back on hours worked to avoid the 30 hours worked, which you have to pay the mandate. Costs them $10,000 per person more. That's according to this. But they are also, here's where I disagree, they are also cutting back on staff. It's both.
Listen, I mean, companies do care about their public reputation, but they care more about being solvent. And in a competitive environment, they've got to have the right prices for their products. The only way they can have low prices for their products is if they keep the cost of labor low and do everything they can to maximize that. So what do they have to do in this case? They have to move people to part-time jobs. They have to not hire people who they'll be forced to offer health coverage to. In the case of Delta Airlines, we know now that Delta Airlines is going to have $100 million in higher health costs next year versus last year. Not all of that is due to Obamacare, but the big chunk, probably at least the majority, and probably two-thirds of it is.
But the joke, Mark Simone, is that it was supposed to be the big bad sequester that was going to abolish all these jobs, including government jobs, particularly government jobs. Well, I don't think so.
No.
I think it's Obamacare.
It's going to cost a lot of government jobs. It's going to cut government staff. So finally, some good came from Obamacare.
Oh, that's a good point. That gives them an excuse to riff, in a sense, reduction in force, right?
Yeah.
Their own employees. Now, this is at the low. You see it more, I think, in the counties and the cities then you'll see it in Washington.
Huge municipalities can't afford to survive this without cutting staff. Imagine what it's going to do to companies. Imagine what this is going to do to small businesses when this kicks in. And nobody in the mainstream media has ever, in an interview with the president, said, tell me why you gave out those 2,000 waivers. If it's so good, why would you exempt all these companies? Aren't you admitting that it's bad for them by giving them a waiver? No one's ever asked you
More
that.
crony capitalism. All right, can I just go back? I want to violate all the rules here. Avik.
Yeah, sure.
I want to see a vote in the Senate on delaying for 1 year Obamacare's individual mandate.
I would love to see that, too.
Tactically, if you could have one, with all these Democrats running in red states, I'd like to see that vote. Any chance of it?
I think, 60% of the people up in 2014 in the Senate are Democrats. Maybe it's 2/3. Harry Reid, of course, controls the Senate, and he'll fight hard not to have that vote. But Mitch McConnell is very clever tactically, and he's pretty clever at getting the votes he wants to get through.
That's it.
We'll have to see if he can get it done.
Ahmed, I think you got a problem. I think if there's a vote in the Senate, all right, the delay for 1 year wins. And since Mitch McConnell is so much smarter than Harry Reid, I think you might wind up getting a vote. I'm going to give you the last word on this.
All I'm going to say is I think the delay approach is much smarter than the defund approach. And so I would advocate your approach strategically. It makes more sense than the defunding, even just from an optics perspective, because people don't want to be seen as vindictive, especially considering what happened in the last election.
All right.